Welcome back. We're continuing with our academic readings on conservatism that will help us with the assignment for this week. And so today we're reading Kim Phillips Fein's article, If Business in the Country Will Be Run Right, which focuses on the post-World War II years. And so this article helps us explain why conservatism took a greater hold in the U.S., and so remember that the textbook chapter that we read makes it seem like conservatism suddenly pops out of nowhere in the 1970s and 1980s. And so you have to understand why that's wrong, to understand how it could come to dominate politics by the 1970s and 1980s. You have to understand how social change happens. And generally, before a big sea change in political thought happens, there's been people working for decades to make that sea change happen. And they've been slowly changing politics. And so Robert Taft was one of those important people. But big change doesn't happen because just one person offered up an idea. And this article helps us understand how groups of people mobilize resources to create political change. And as historians, we often see change coming from what we call the top down or the bottom up. And bottom up change comes from groups of people who don't have many resources. These are ordinary folks without access to huge sums of money. They aren't politicians who have the ability to craft new laws. They aren't judges who have the power to hand down rulings. And so an example of bottom-up change would be the civil rights movement, when thousands of ordinary folks used protest and civil disobedience to create change. Top-down change is the opposite. It comes from people who have the resources who already are in positions of power. And that's the type of change that we're going to read about today. Phillips Fein explains the importance of businessmen in the rise of conservatism. And I want you to pay attention to how they use their resources to promote conservatism in the post-World War II years. And so without this information in the new textbook section that we're writing, it would seem like conservatism was just an idea that some people believed in. But readers would never get the sense of why conservatism slowly becomes more popular. And it's usually a big problem with textbooks, right? You rarely get the sense of how big social and political change actually happens. So as you read this, think about what groups and people you want to include. And think about, are there conservative victories in here that you want to include? And ask yourself, what's necessary to show textbook readers how important businessmen were to the rising popularity of conservatism. Right, so as always, email me if you have any trouble when you're reading this.